Today I've got a very special video for you. We're going to be looking around Belgrade Fortress in Serbia. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So recently, in fact just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Serbia, Belgrade, for an armour fitting. There's going to be a video coming up about that as well, talking about the armour, looking at the fitting and all of that kind of stuff. But today what I've got for you is a video looking around Belgrade Fortress. The fortress is located, unsurprisingly, in Belgrade in Serbia, the capital, and it's at the confluence, the convergence of the Sava and the Danube rivers. So it's a very tactically important location and has been for a long time. So I won't go into the detailed potted history of Belgrade and the fortress here, because that's not what this video is about and it would take a long time to do it. But just as a very brief view, essentially we know that there was some sort of fortified town there going all the way back to about 400 BC. But when we get into the Roman area, it becomes a fortress of some sort, some fortified settlement known as Singidunum. Through the next few centuries, there are various movements of people. There's attacks by the Huns and the Goths. Attila the Hun in the 5th century is thought to be buried somewhere around here. And then ultimately the Slavs, the group of people who essentially become most of the Serbs that live there now, moved in. But it was also a borderland with Hungary. And Emperor Justinian created a fortress there, or rather rebuilt the fortress there in the 500s. So it's a really interesting region, and there's a big convergence. You've got the Avars to the north, and then ultimately the Hungarians. You've got Slavic people moving in, you've got the Goths and the Huns moving through, and also mixing probably to some degree. And then you've got the Byzantines to the south. You've also got the convergence when we split between the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire around this area as well. So it's an amazingly important location in history. But most of the pre-medieval stuff you can't really see on the ground at the fortress, so you won't see it in this video. What you can mostly see in this video is stuff which dates to the 12th and 13th century, I would say, onwards right the way through to the 17th and 18th century. So we're really talking about medieval through Renaissance and through to kind of early modern. Now during this period, the fortification itself was at various times Hungarian, Serbian, Bulgarian, and it kind of changed hands several times. It was a very, as I say, a very important geographical feature, a very formidable fortress, and therefore it was used like a chess piece at this convergence of the Sava and the Danube rivers, and just where it sat in Europe. So during the medieval period it was primarily Byzantine, Hungarian, for a time it was Serbian, then it went back to Hungarian, and the Ottomans tried to conquer it in 1456 but failed. But the Ottomans returned, and in 1521 it was attacked, and it was actually taken by the Ottomans, and in fact the whole region came under Ottoman control and remained under Ottoman control until 1867, a long old time. And so we do see Ottoman influences, even architectural, you'll see in a minute. But there was a brief period, really, weirdly, there was a brief period in the 1700s, in the first half of the 1700s, where the Austrians were actually in control of it, and they did a bunch of building there as well. So this is the White Fortress, Belgrade. It's absolutely fantastic. There's a military museum there as well, with tanks as well. But it's an absolutely important and fascinating historical monument, and pretty much the most, I think it is the most visited tourist attraction in Serbia, with about 2 million visitors a year. Anyway, let's get on with the video. And just before we do dive into it, in case you're wondering why I look like that on the video, I'd walked up a really big hill. It was 38 degrees. It was extremely hot, so I'm very sweaty, slightly sunburned, and I had an allergic reaction in my eyes, some kind of hay fever thing. So I look quite awful in the video. But please bear with me, and hopefully it's interesting anyway. Over to the White Fortress. So today we're going to be talking about the White Fortress in Belgrade, Serbia. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria, and over there is the Danube. That's right, the blue Danube. And I'm here in Belgrade in Serbia at the moment. And I'm standing pretty much in the middle, we're kind of on the edge actually, the precipice overlooking the Danube there, of the so-called White Fortress, as it's sometimes known, Belgrade, or Belgrade, as we now call it, Belgrade, and that translates as White Fortress. So we're going to be looking in this episode at a little bit of the history of this amazing fortification, which goes back all the way to the Roman era. In fact, we could say further beyond that, but we could say the stone fortification here probably dates mostly to the Roman and later Byzantine era. And obviously Serbia has a very interesting history, and at various points has been under Bulgarian rule, Byzantine rule, its own rule as well. We'll look at that. And so this castle kind of shows all of those bits of history in one location, layered on top of each other like a giant sandwich. And before anyone asks, yes, I am absolutely drenched because it's really hot. I'm in the baking sun, there's no shade here, and it's 36 degrees Celsius. It's due to get to 38 tomorrow, which is pretty hot for a Brit. Obviously most of the fortification is now derelict, it's not there, it's been taken down. The stone would have been robbed away to build other buildings in what's now the modern city. Originally, interesting detail about Belgrade is that a lot of the city used to dwell within this enormous perimeter of the fortification, and it was one of the particular things about it. It wasn't until later that they actually branched out into the main city. So obviously being there right by the edge of the Danube, it has an oversight of the river, can control the river, but also has access to it for trade. So very, very important. As we can see here, most of these towers have been reduced down to about 10 or 12 feet tall in most cases, but you can see a lot of details. Like if we look here, we can see the defensive archers, kind of slits as it were, for shooting through each place through here. If we come around here, we can see the remains of supporting columns just behind me down there, and there's another one over there that have come down. Obviously they would have been supporting a roof structure and a large tower above this. In some places the doorways still survive, or at least this has been propped up with a concrete lintel, but basically there's a doorway. So we can go through here. Yes, it's a little bit low. Is that because the people are short or tiny? Certainly not here. I think the people in Serbia are really tall, but this is obviously easier to build, easier to make doors for, easier to defend. So don't always judge people's height by the doorway. Let's go through. So here we are actually inside one of the cool rooms, and nice bit of health and safety up there, propped up with some bits of wood. But if we come around here, you can see there two defensive windows for shooting through. So for those of you interested in the archaeology of places like this, the stone walls that we see here, most of them are going to be medieval. Between the 12th and 15th centuries, this castle was rebuilt and added to many times during those centuries by successive rulers. And it was under various powers, Bulgarians, Byzantines and Serbian as well. And an interesting detail is you see here, between the stones, we've got this sort of red brickwork, tilework. And it's almost certain that that has been robbed out of an earlier construction. So a lot of the stone of these walls will not be fresh, it will be taken from elsewhere. And sometimes we can find Roman and Byzantine kind of building materials used in the structure later on, let's say in the 15th century. I always like to see an angle of wall. You've got quite a long bit standing there, and of course it stayed standing because it's stronger at that corner, because you've got the two walls butting up against each other. So when you're looking at the castle, an interesting note is the way they often constructed it. If we look down this column here, you can see round the edge, around there, is neat dressed stone, and in the middle is rubble, and that's the normal way for medieval people to construct walls. They weren't solid, not usually, sometimes they were, but they weren't usually solid stone all the way through. You usually save your best dressed stone for the outside, and there's rubble on the inside. We can actually see a perfect example of that here on this wall end here, where you can see it's got dressed stone on one side and dressed stone on the other, and rubble there in the middle. Completely normal, but remember, of course, when we're talking about sieges, when you're talking about breaking a wall, either undermining it, bringing it down, ramming it, shooting it, whatever, obviously if you can break that facing stone, the centre is going to be much softer. So here we are in one of the many gateways. This is probably 17th, 18th century, I think. Looking at the brickwork around the arches and the decoration on the outside. These would have been punched through earlier walls, or indeed this part of the wall might actually be 18th century. So something that's really interesting about many castles and forts is they continued in use and were adapted to new methods of warfare. So obviously as cannons came along in the 15th century and particularly in the 16th century, fortifications had to adapt with more angled walls to provide deflective surfaces, and that's exactly what we see here in Belgrade. So we see, so-called star forts come along, for example, so they're glancing surfaces against cannons, not something they really had to worry about before the 15th century. And so sometimes we see medieval walls updated for the new type of siege warfare, and sometimes we see just completely new walls put on the outside of or around earlier medieval fortifications. So we come down here, man, I'm sweaty, I can see myself in the camera. So this is amazing view, that's the Danube out there. Let's come down onto the outside, watching where I step because I'm going to some steps. There we go, so there's the wall going all the way along there. So we're on the outside of the fortification here. I don't know actually what age these walls are. They do look medieval, I have to say, but notice that we have another wall on the outside of that wall, so that it's just walls and walls and walls and walls and walls. And obviously that's normal with castles and fortifications. But here in Belgrade, it's like taken to the max. There are walls outside, walls outside, walls outside, walls, basically all the way down to the flat floodplain, which goes out to the river, which would have been a floodplain. So you couldn't build on that. Although that being said, there is a tower out there, and almost certainly originally, I'm guessing, but there would have been one on the other side, and there would have been a chain across that to control the entrance to the estuary. And thankfully, my guess, or educated guess, should we say, was correct. So this is from the end of the 17th century, this particular doorway. This is known as the Defterdar Gate. Defterdar Gate? Anyway, it points out towards the Danube. And it's a fairly large gateway, and this is 17th century, so this was a very important fortification still in the late 1600s. Now, Belgrade, like many places in the Balkans, was invaded by the Ottoman Turks in the 16th century, and in fact that's why, if we look here, you can see a very Ottoman-inspired water fountain. So this is associated with, let's just go and read the sign, it says the Sokolovic fountain. Associated with Mehmed Pasha, 1578. So this is the period when the Turks really are having a great influence on this area as a whole. So one of the things that's really notable about Belgrade here in Belgrade, the White Fortress, is the immenseness of the area covered. So obviously you've got the top of the hill here, which is all fortified all the way around with an enormous, it's a big park now, but an enormous amount of land in here within the main fortification. But then if we look, that's the Danube over there, if we look down here, there's more walls all the way down there, going all the way, right the way over to the river. It's absolutely huge area covered. I'm sure that most of you know this anyway, but just in case you don't, those holes in the wall there, and if we look inside the tower in there, they are almost always indicative of where there's been a suspended floor, a wooden floor. So beams would have gone in there and a walkway would have been around there. And obviously this tower would have been at least, it would have had at least 2 levels to it. So this is a really interesting part I really like. We've got a gatehouse behind me here. Okay, so just over there you've got a big gate, very impressive gate, medieval, and at the top of it, hopefully you can just see if we come back here, you can just see, oh, I can't quite see, let's move over here. There we go, up there you can see some projections, and they would have gone across to support some kind of structure, bridge or walkway over to what's above the main gate up here. So it's a kind of double gated gatehouse, big gate. You could easily, people on horseback could easily ride through this, and then that comes through. If I walk through that gate and through the other gate, it comes through to a bridge, so very difficult to get across. And you've got yet more fortification over there, incredibly well protected, and this is over a dip under which there's another gate over there. So there's the gate with a road which goes underneath here, and then the sides of this are curved, very difficult to get up, obviously there. We go around here, curved over there as well to the curtain wall up there. But what I want to show you is this really cool original tower standing just up there, which is a rounded tower. I'm guessing, without looking it up, probably 12th, 13th century from the shape of it. Certainly not post 15th anyway, so it's 12th, 13th, 14th, something like that. So this is one of the oldest, tallest standing bits of the fortification still. And then as we can look around here, you can see there's a whole load of old stuff still standing around here as well. And I really like around the base of that big tower up there, there's a sort of sneaky walkway which goes around the edge, around the bottom of it, around here. There's a, I don't know what this is, there's some kind of square structure just on this corner. Maybe it's a reinforcing at the bottom of the tower, but we've got this sneaky walkway which goes around the side, and of course you can see between these crenellations, you can see places where you could shoot through there, and indeed if you were being attacked, people trying to get across that bridge, you've got a perfect sight on them, either with, you know, handguns, crossbows, longbows, whatever you've got, recurve bows in this part of the world quite often. So it's a really good defensible position to check that view across that bridge over there. And again, just from an archaeology point of view, if you look at this wall behind me, you can see it's made of all sorts of bits of stone, all different periods, different types. Probably this was built from stone from another previous structure, so including going all the way back to Roman period. Probably the red bricks could be Byzantine, could even be Roman, mixed in with the stone. So just loads of archaeology in one wall there. Now obviously since the earliest times, bridges, people talk about drawbridges and moats and all these kind of things, but just simple bridges are one of the best defensive structures because of course firstly, while they're there for normal everyday purposes, it's just a straight route in and out, no problems, it's a road essentially. But when it comes to being attacked or besieged, if they get in this far, then at this point they're now channeled, they're funneled into a killing zone. As we saw, we've got all of the defences all pointing down towards this bridge here. So if they come onto this bridge, they're going to be shot with everything. But in a last ditch, if you really need to, you can burn the bridge, and you burn the bridge, it's not there anymore. So bridges are just a great, easy way of making a really good defensive point pretty much anywhere. Now this little bastion that I'm on here has been restored, but it's based on, I believe, a 17th century one. And much like in Malta, if you ever go to Malta, you'll see loads of these things. And they're brilliant, they're essentially a guard's box, but look at this. It's boiling. I think it's 36 and nearly 37 degrees now. So if you're a soldier, you're going to want somewhere to sit in the shade when you've got to be up here all day. And in terms of the shape of these sorts of bastions, this is a classic artillery bastion. It has to be big enough for a gun or multiple guns to be able to move it around and change which direction they're aiming in and be loaded. And remember, of course, that when they're fired, there's a recoil to them as well. So you really need a much larger surface area to operate firearms, cannons, than you would do with earlier medieval towers. And also when you're in these, always look at where they're pointing. they tend to point up long straight lines where, should the enemy get on top of that wall over there, just up there, you can sweep it with grape shot or anything else. And yet again we have down there another bridge, which is another choke point with a good firing position on it. So even within your structure, you're looking at places you can stop and hold and hopefully kill attacking enemies. So an interesting detail here, we've got another gatehouse, and just to talk about the gates for a second, so we've got gates on both sides and another one of those bridges. I love bridges here, I love bridges everywhere. Right, so notice that this is actually a wooden gate door. If we come around to the side of it, you can see it's wood there. Okay, these are almost certainly not original. These are probably 19th century. However, they would have been based on what was here before. Now notice it is clad in something. What do you think it's clad? Get posting down below if you can think. This is actually, I've poked it, so I know it's lead. Okay, now the reason why you might line a gate with lead is potentially to protect the wood from weathering, from other things, from attacking. But you know, the weather and things like that are also a factor. However, cladding gates is not unusual to this place. It's actually quite common, and I think a lot of people don't realise, especially if we look at historical artwork, they usually show just wooden gates. But in fact, we know that wooden gates were often clad like this, and very often clad in iron, to exactly what you might think, to protect them from being hacked into with axes, bashed through with rams, all this kind of stuff, just to make them more durable. But what's interesting is they recycled material, so this is probably roofing lead off a local roof when it was redone, but they often recycled the iron sheets, so much so that there are a few cases where we actually see recognisable bits of armour on the gate, even bits of cuirass and bits of leg harness and stuff like this. So any old iron that was going, they recycled it and slapped it on the front door because it made the gate more durable. So something we've got here, which is obviously a modern creation, is barriers, a little tournament or training field down there. Now this is obviously a modern thing that they've decided to put here, but we actually know from written and sometimes artistic records that this is exactly what they did at castles. You need a training area for your knights and every other soldier. So very often there would be an area dedicated to archery practice, an area dedicated to horsemanship and skill at arms and jousting, and barriers as well, because of course remember that castles were important locations for tournaments, sometimes at a marriage or a diplomatic a truce, treaty. They would often have these sorts of heraldic, chivalric rather, festivals essentially. So things like this, usually in open areas, usually I would say in a bigger open area, probably outside the castle, we very often find. So don't just think this is a modern thing. I've just noticed we've got some archery targets down there. Don't just think this is a modern thing. This is actually fairly representative of what they would have done. But my opinion is they would have usually been outside the castle, usually in a bigger field with a bit more space, especially for horses. And this is probably one of the most famous sites of this castle, and this is one of the main original medieval entrances. I'm suggesting 13th century probably for those towers. I'll look it up and put it down, but basically this is the original one of the main entrance gatehouses. And then you'll notice that we've got additional later 17th and 18th century fortifications put around the outside for the mounting of artillery. And in fact, as mentioned, that gate is actually called Leopold's Gate. It's just behind me here, and you can see the wall going all the way around there. And this was called Leopold's Gate, as I mentioned, and it was built in the 1690s. So this is really at the period when they're starting to completely reconceive how they look at fortifications, to put as much artillery on them and make them as invulnerable to artillery as possible. So I hope you've enjoyed that tour. Maybe one day we'll come back here and do a deeper dive, but it's incredibly hot today. So I've shown you as much as I can of Belgrade Fortress, but it's absolutely awesome. I recommend, if you're in the area, you definitely come and visit it, and also the military museum as well. So thanks a lot for watching, and I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks.